we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. I know it's late in the afternoon on the last day of a conference. That's usually when people tend to disappear off into the city. So I appreciate you sticking around to hear me talk. So this talk is, I think the meta theme running throughout this whole talk is time. Right? I mean, time is the thing we need to make our jobs better, right? So we can do the things we want to do, so our company can get the things done it wants to get done. Time is also the thing we need to make our lives better, right? How do we get home to our families or our friends or the things that we want to do with our life other than be chained to our laptops, right? So, a lot of this is going to be about the migration or the kind of evolution from, systems administration to SRE. I'm going to get into a little bit on that, but really going to be focused on that time aspect. And I think that that's one of the things that the SRE movement is really bringing to operations is this idea of, creating the capacity, creating the space to make tomorrow better than today, right? And so that's the kind of the central theme here. I'm going to focus a lot on the time aspect of it. There's a lot more to SRE. I'll try to cover the main points, but really this is about, how do you find the time to make tomorrow better than today. So kind of the genesis for this talk started back in February with this tweet that I got a lot of feedback through Twitter and also through other ways saying, I said, hey, an SRE buried under Toil, I'll explain what that is later, and starved of time for being able to do engineering work isn't really an SRE, right? It's just a long-suffering systems administrator with a new job title, right? And that kind of spurred a lot of agreement, some debate. But if you think about it, let's think about kind of how life goes for a lot of us. How many folks are work in operations? Okay, good. My people. All right. So usually the DevOps conference, it's like a bunch of Ruby developers. So, not that far away, probably in a company just like yours, right? Let's think about what life's like. First of all, overloaded, constant firefighting, constant interruptions, right? So if it's not one thing, it's another thing. Your ticket queue's, blowing up. Your Slack's blowing up. You're getting phone calls, people talking over the cube wall at you. And you're constantly dealing with these interruptions and firefighting. And meanwhile, you've got things that were due yesterday you can't get to. You got things that are due tomorrow that are waiting on you, and they're coming up. And you're not being interrupted. You're waiting in ticket queues, right? So anything you need to get done, you find yourself having to, fill out a ticket, wait for somebody to, use the back channels and the side channels to try to get stuff escalated. And then things break. They break again. Just for good measure, they break again, right? It's a lot of repetitive problems. I mean, in some ways, some things we know how they're going to break, but they keep happening. In other ways, we don't know how. We keep finding new ways to break things. And all that time, we're just interjecting, a little bit more waiting, a little bit more of those interruptions into our life. And then there's this general kind of pain of, everyone's busy, right? We're all working at, 50 hours a week, but it doesn't get any better, right? We're constantly, whether it's a new business delivery project or an improvement project or firefighting or responding to incidents, there's a lot of activity and a lot of action, but fundamentally we don't feel like things are really getting that much better. And so we got all these things weighing down on us, and then just for good measure, right? In come the executives with the, hey, why does everything take so long and cost too much and break too often? And what are you doing wrong, right? So, it's there's a lot of frustration going on, and has been going on. And a lot of times people think, well, that's just how it is, right? That's life in operations. And then along this new idea of SRE, right? And we're starting to see it in the press. We're starting to see it, all these companies talking about it. There's conferences about it now. And, everyone's got a little bit different definition of it. Some saying, hey, SREs, when you ask, software engineers to do operations, SREs when ops does more engineering work than operations, SREs, next generation cloud native operations. I actually like this one from Google. They say, class SRE implements DevOps, right? SRE is a operations specific implementation of a DevOps way of working. But the reality is for most people, it just seems like, well, that's impossible. How's that possibly going to work, right? How am I going to get more time to do engineering work than I am dealing with all this chaos that I have to deal with now? Must be nice, but how's that ever going to work here? But invariably, like all things that came from places like Google, like, oh, we should be doing that, right? So eventually the conversation comes around and says, have you heard of this SRE thing? They seem to be getting great results, right? They're getting all this out of their teams, high velocity and high performance. We should do that, right? Well, what do we got today? Well, we got system administrators, right? Well, let's make them SREs, right? And so you come along and they're like, it's just going to be easy. They're now SREs, right? Everyone's going to be happy. Everything's going to be great, right? But when you're on the receiving end of this, it feels more like this, right? Like, hey, your new title's an SRE, right? Now go write some code and be better at your job, right? And the reality you're thinking about, your kind of ITIL-driven cab processes and kind of all the legacy you have to deal with and the tickets and, just like, well, how's this possibly going to work, right? So invariably we continue on this experiment, right? And remember we're the classic sysadmins, overloaded, constant firefighting, tickets for everything, queues, things keep breaking, takes too long, costs too much. Now we're SREs, right? Well, guess what, right? We're in the same boat, right? Because the reality is, changing job titles or even adding individual skills doesn't make systems administrators into SREs, right? It is true, yes, that, hey, it's great. People like skills are awesome, right? Like, hey, it'd be great if we could, invested everyone's time and training and, these new observability ideas kind of as a complement to monitoring and upskilling in the programming department and distributed architecture conversations and new cultural ideas like blameless postmortems. Each of these things are great unto themselves and are worthy things. But if we put it to people who are still in this same painful way of working, they don't have time to actually go and implement these things, right? We're still back in the same old systems administration pain that we used to have. So the reality is that changing job titles, much like just suddenly renaming your release engineering team the DevOps team, right, doesn't magically solve your problems. Same way as just saying, hey, systems administrators, you're now SREs, doesn't solve your problems. It solves their problem, which is as soon as they do that, they're going to get 1 million LinkedIn requests from recruiters and will probably get paid a lot more to leave your company, but it doesn't help your company in any way. So, if you dig into it, SRE is fundamentally a rethinking of how operations work gets done, right? So if you think about it, it's the principles, right, behind SRE that make SRE different. Now, I should say, much like DevOps, different companies have different interpretations of what SRE actually is. But I think most people agree that the Google book, the original they put their flag in the ground. It's SREs named after actually their operations, the name for their operations organization. And their book does a good job of explaining the principles and the philosophy and the approach behind it. And most companies that are kind of held up as SRE examples, they have different interpretations of different parts of it, but they all generally agree that that the Google definitions are a pretty good approximation of what they're all trying to achieve. So Stephen Thorne from Google has a great presentation. By the way, these slides, I'll tweet them out after this talk at Damon Edwards. Also, I know the conference folks are going to just distribute them, so you don't have to take notes. But a great talk to watch. He kind of goes through the principles of SRE, and his main point is there's these 3 principles that really make SRE, right? Number 1 is SREs need service level objectives with consequences. So what's that all about? So service level objective, it sounds a lot like a service level agreement, but it's different, right? So a service level objective, if you think about it, there's a service level indicator, some business understandable metric usually. Could be uptime, could be availability, could be page load time, something that the users would care about. And we've got that service level indicator, and if we think about it from whatever it is, from 0 to 100, 100 being perfect, 0 being complete failure, the service level objective is agreed upon what is the minimum level there, what is the acceptable level of performance that the business and everybody will agree to. So far, it kind of sounds like a service level agreement, right? But it starts to get different when they say, well, they consider that level above the service level agreement. They call that an air budget, which means that we don't need to hit 100%. The business agreed we only need to hit whatever that level is. So anything above that is budget that we should spend to do new things, right? You need 1 9, don't build for 3 9s, right? So it's the idea that we have this budget there that we can use and we can spend. That's kind of the first departure. But the real major departure from the service level agreement idea is a service level agreement is basically kind of threat of penalty. You're agreeing to achieve something. So often in SLA in the ops world is, well, we're saying we're going to provide this level of service, and if we don't, the penalty's on us, right? Our bad, right? And in the SLO and air budget world, it's a tool for shared responsibility. So it's saying that we've got the full life cycle, development, the product, business, and operations to agree this is the service level objective. And in their world, this is not about writing software, it's about running software. So the SLO actually takes priority. So everyone's agreeing to that. So if the SLO is blown, the air budget is blown, or SLO, we fall below the SLO, the service level objective, that much take priority. We all have to swarm to solve that problem, which means if that means we have to tell the business, hey, sorry, no new features until we fix this problem. Or even in the extreme case, you hear about, I'm going to return the pager to the developers. They have to support this thing in production until we can get it up above that line. In traditional operations thinking, that's just like, whoa, like how's that going to work? We can't tell the business to stop, right? But in this case, that is very much a part of this mechanism. So, kind of in the SRE conversation, it's like the fundamental thing here is this idea of having these SLOs, air budgets, and having real consequences for the whole organization behind them kind of sets us apart from traditional operations thinking. Second one here, obviously if you know from the title of my talk, this is very important to me, which is SREs have time to make tomorrow better than today, right? That's another principle. So what does that actually mean? So I think one of the great inventions of the SRE movement is this word toil, right? And toil, I'll actually use one of the Google definitions here, right? Toil is the kind of work tied to running a production service that tends to be manual, repetitive, automatable, tactical, devoid of enduring value, right? Which I think is a huge piece of this. It's that you're not adding value, you're not making tomorrow better than today, and it scales linearly as a service grows, right? So I know I covered this part in my previous talk today, but if you didn't see it, I'll go through it again. Toil is the stuff that lacks enduring value. It's rote and repetitive. It's tactical. It increases with scale, right? And it can and probably should be automated. Versus what we really want to have is engineering work, right? You figure you can divide your day into, in toil and engineering work. Engineering work, it needs human creativity, right? It builds enduring value for the business. It's strategic. It moves things forward. It enables us to scale instead of being just the manual work we have to do to make things, or the one-off work to make things scale. So why this is so important is we want to have enough time, we want to have enough engineering work, because there's two things you can do with engineering work. One is improving the business, and the second is reducing toil, right? Because if we don't have enough, right, engineering time, it's like an engineering bankruptcy, you get what happens at a lot of operations teams is they're just constantly treading water, trying to keep their head above the water line, and they don't have the capacity to improve the business, and they don't have capacity to help themselves out of that constant churn, and that's you get these organizations that kind of get into this downward spiral, and you can't really get out of it. And so, toil is really a naturally occurring force. Niall Murphy from Microsoft talks a lot about this, that, even in these organizations that are held up as paragons of, cloud native and cloud operations and SRE and all that, there's still this constant evolution, right? That things are always released a little earlier than they should be, or we always have failure or issues that we haven't really, thought out beforehand. So everything goes through this general evolution, right? Where we have no automation, right? It's just, there's maintenance tasks we have to do, or scaling issues, or database updates, or whatever it is. It's just there. We gotta deal with it, right? And then we kind of build our externally maintained system-specific automation, right? Like Bob's scripts, right? I've got my scripts, in my home directory doing my thing, right? And then we've got kind of more generic automation. Well, it's over there in that directory, but we can all get to it and use it. Maybe it comes through our build process, right? And then there's the internally maintained system-specific automation, like, okay, well, we'll release the scripts with the next version of the service, right? And then, finally we get to the point where, hey, like, why don't we just put that into the app itself, so we don't need to do some database maintenance, it does it itself, right? Or if we want to add a new, X, Y, or Z feature to, or configuration change to it, let's just make a page in the app that actually does that configuration, right? So everything kind of goes through this constant cycle. It says unless your business is dead, right, you're always going to be going through this idea where Toil is going to be, a lot of at the beginning, you're going to beat it out of a system, and then, it's less and less, but the next thing will come along. So Toil ends up being this kind of constant, repetitive force that you really can't ever fight back. You just have to, or can get rid of completely. You have to just, have mechanisms to reduce the impact. So that's principle number 2. Number 3, which is really interesting, is SRE teams have the ability to regulate their workload. And, I think a good example of this, which kind of blows people's minds sometimes, is what if handing off the responsibility for maintaining something in production to an SRE or ops team wasn't a right? You had to actually earn it, right? And what really this means is the ability to separate the running in production from being run by SRE or operations, right? Which in most cases, that's impossible, right? It's production. Production is owned by operations. But you see these organizations, they've separated these two ideas to say, hey, we'll build the tooling. We'll do things like production-ready reviews and those sort of things. But we'll say, hey, unless your application has gotten to a certain level of stability, I want the developers, the people writing it, they will maintain it in production until we get to a certain level of quality or in reliability, and that's a fundamentally, huge departure. And now it takes tooling and discipline and certain things to make that happen. But for most people, that's like mind blowing. How can that possibly be? Yet, if you follow through the SRE principles here, that's what we're trying to achieve. Because if the operations team can't regulate its own workload, it becomes the aggrieved party, and things get dumped on it. It's always happened for generations. Operations just has to deal, right? We have all the responsibility and none of the control of or the ownership of being able to fix things. In this way, it gives an important feedback mechanism to the rest of the organization. And also the SRE kind of point of thinking or point of view of kind of, I've noticed this in sort of SRE heavy organizations, is that there's this traditional kind of hierarchy of priorities, right, and how organizations fund themselves and what they think about and what they're planning for, and it kind of goes top down. Product development, capacity planning, these procedures. And the bottom line is the kind of the monitoring. But you see it from the SRE perspective, they look at it the other way. That the most important thing is we're not writing software, we're running software. So the most important thing about running software is it has to be available, right? It's got to be running. So they see it the opposite direction. They say, well, the most important thing is monitoring, because how do we know if something's up or not, right? And then once that's in place, we'd have to have discipline around incident response, because if there's a problem, we got to fix it, right? Again, the whole idea here is we're running software as a business. And then, what do we deal with afterwards? And then testing, capacity planning, finally up to product. So they're fundamentally looking at the world from an operations perspective, because they know that operations is their business, right? And I think a lot of organizations come at it from the opposite way, where they think, oh, the product, the software is our writing software is our business, but it's not, right? The running service is the business. That's what you get paid for, right? By its very definition, unless you actually write software. That's, I think, a different story if you're a packaged software vendor. So these are really the three principles that set SRE apart. By the way, I've got plenty of time. I'll just pause. Any questions on those, or does this seem crazy to anybody, or familiar, or curious? Anyone? How many folks have been doing this sort of thing in their organization already? Having success? Good? Yeah. Good to know. Don't be shy. So where to start, right? I'd call this the practical approach, right? Because if you talk to the, sort of SRE luminaries, right, and you go to SRE Con, these events, they all talk about, well, number one is the most important. If you don't have SLOs with consequences, you don't have an SRE team. If you have SLOs with consequences, you've got the foundation for SRE. But guess what? That's really hard, right? That's a company, especially if you're coming from a legacy organization, or and I don't use legacy as pejorative. I look at legacy as the history of success. You've been around long enough and successful enough to accumulate different generations of technologies and ways of working. So changing a company culture in that situation to say, hey, we're going to have these things called SLOs, and if they're blowing, then it's as much on development and the business to figure out how to fix it as it is operations. That generally doesn't go over very well. I think you're kind of a lunatic, right? So while I think it's an important conversation to have, that may not be the right place to start. Same way as the ability to regulate your workload, right? Saying, hey, developers should manage their own applications in production, right? That's the compliance people will throw you out the door, right? So that's another hard change, right? A good important conversation to have to teach these ideas, but it's very difficult to lead with that, right? Where the one I've seen that's the most probably successful is this idea of focusing in on toil, right? Focusing in on, how do you make tomorrow better than today? How do we create the capacity so we can do these other things, right? And, I find that reducing on toil really is a great, thing because everybody wins, right? Who doesn't want to have more time, right? Who doesn't want to say we're going to get more, we're going to do more with the same people and less time, right? That's a winning message, every time. So why focus on it? Lots of value independent of SRE. You don't have to say the words SRE, right? You can just say, hey, we want to focus on, we have strategies here to get more out of the folks we already have and to stop, burying them in toil and, spend more time on our engineering work. Because obviously, our people are our most expensive assets, right? So shouldn't we want to stay out of their way, right? Why do we want to burden them with these inefficiencies, this waste, right? It's like taking money outside and lighting it on fire. We probably don't want to do it, right? So successful strategies for reducing toil that I've seen, it's pretty straightforward. Number one, track toil levels for each team. It's crazy how this doesn't happen, right? So first of all, you got to standardize on a definition. In a lot of organizations, it's like, what's toil? What's not toil? Meetings and email, are those toil? Probably those are more overhead, right? They aren't your actual day-to-day job. Toil is more like in your day-to-day operations work itself, looking at it and saying, how much of this is repetitive, non-value adding, non-differentiating, maybe we have to do it to keep the lights on, but it's not moving us forward, versus how much this work is actually moving the company and ourselves in a better direction. So standardize on a definition is very important. If you jump into the conversation, people have different definitions, bad things happen. Tracking, number one, I've seen just a lot of folks just do self-reporting, right? Just say, hey, over the last week, how much of your time you think was spent on this toil versus engineering work? Getting a little more specific, we've seen folks do, like periodic surveys, like even SurveyMonkey or something like that. And also they just kind of lean on their their kind of scrum master or project managers, whoever they have, just to, hey, do some interviewing and sampling. And the key thing is really that, not getting lost in the time tracking weeds, because this really doesn't matter. It's more of a general sense of balance, right? What percentage of our time is spent on toil? What percent of our time is spent on engineering work? So, be careful resisting the urge to say, oh, well, we have to have a Jira ticket for everything and, put down to the minute of how much time you spend. It's just not that important. It's more important of understanding the balance of work on a team for any given period of time. So, kind of step two is set a toil limit for each team. The kind of conventional wisdom out there in the industry is 50%, right? Less than 50% of a team's time spent on toil versus engineering work. Also interesting thing about this, your mileage may vary on the limit. I think 50% is a nice balance, so that makes sense as well. The universe likes balance, but also it's accepting that, hey, sometimes teams are going to be out of whack, right? There's going to be a major push or some major thing going on, and we're just going to be kind of over the limit for a while, but that's by design, and then we're kind of come back into equilibrium. So make sure you're looking at it kind of from a long enough time period. Step three is funding the efforts to reduce the toil, right? Which seems like a pretty basic idea, but a lot of organizations, they'll start doing number one and two, but they'll kind of forget about it. They'll go, oh, well, this team is buried in this repetitive work. We should fix that, right? And now let's get busy doing something else. We forget about actually fixing it. At our SRECon this last year, some of the guys from LinkedIn, Michael Kehoe and Todd Polino, gave a talk about, they have this program called Code Yellow, which actually Code Yellow in U.S. hospitals or health systems means prepare for impending disaster. So that's their formal program for declaring a Code Yellow for a team, and which means we're going to marshal the resources to help that team out, help them get back in balance, so they're not top heavy on on Toil, and then use it as an official funded program as a way of specifying and following through on these things. Because it's one thing to tell people, hey, that's terrible, you're buried in Toil, but you've got to give them the next step, which is we're here to help you, and here's how we're going to marshal the resources to do it. So where to focus on reducing Toil, right? It's kind of three areas, right? One is tech debt, right? Pretty obvious there. The second is re-engineering processes. It's crazy how sometimes we just stand back far enough and look at who does what and when things are done in the life cycle, and you can just by kind of moving work around in the organization, there's actually a lot of Toil that you can get rid of, or do engineering steps that will that will eliminate it. So those first two ones are kind of going to be very company specific. I don't really have a lot of advice for that, other than run it through a formal program. But the third, I do know a lot about, and that's really about this idea of enabling self-service, right? So if you can think about in the day-to-day of our life, how much time do you spend waiting on somebody, right? Oh, I got to fill out a ticket and wait for something, right? And guess what you're doing when you're filling that ticket out? You're introducing an interruption in somebody else, right? So now it's like I put waiting in my life and interruptions in somebody else's life, and that adds up, right? And the person has to field the interruption. They're avoiding their other work that's kind of burning at the same time. And so every time we're in this repetitive request cycle, we're interjecting a little more waiting and a little more interruptions into our work. So the idea of using self-service to eliminate that is really a key moment or key mechanism for getting rid of Toil and for creating more time for people in the organization to go and do other things like reducing Toil and moving the business forward. So how do you enable self-service, right? How do we empower these teams to go and do this for themselves, right? And a lot of organizations, I've seen them kind of the two paths. One is go top down, say, hey, we're going to make this a top down program, and we're going to have an architecture team that's going to figure out how to introduce more self-service to organization. It tends to work okay, but the most powerful ones are the organizations that enable the teams to spot and fix anti-patterns themselves, right? So to go out and say, where are these instances of these waiting and interruptions, and how can we put self-service in place to fix those ourselves. So some anti-patterns here, with classic one, do this for me and do it again, then do it again, right? Kind of already discussed this one. Instead of replace those repetitive requests with self-service. It's a great example of from the folks at Major League Baseball, the baseball league in the United States, one of the largest professional sports leagues in the world. They have a central technology organization. They have a big ERP system that's basically every baseball player from Mickey Mantle and Babe Ruth to Alex Rodriguez. All their stats and contracts and data, everything's in this system, right? Every player that's ever touched, Major League Baseball is in there, and it's been built by consultants for 20 or 30 years, and it's one of these things where it's just a beast, and every time anything happens, these two folks, they have to go and stop what they're doing, and they have to go, and they're ops folks, and they have to go, and they have to, it takes a day to redeploy things, or they're always constantly trying to fix it, and when they finally put self-service into place, they called it their virtual. These two folks' name, I'm not sure if they want to talk about it publicly, but they, once they put that into place, it was crazy. They found out all their other applications had all kinds of problems as well, right? But they didn't have a time to ever look at it because this ERP thing was their crown jewels, and they were constantly, firefighting and dealing with that. Then when they finally put self-service into place, let people deploy themselves, let people to restart themselves, health checks, all the kind of known issues, they created self-service capabilities for the different for other folks in the organization to solve the problems themselves. They then had all this time to work on their other work. So it's a huge win. Another classic, anti-pattern is that, hey, I could do that, but I can't get to it, right? Whether it's because of compliance reasons or security reasons or just, fear of people causing problems. There's some reason why I can't get into that environment. I can't do something. I now have to open a ticket, make a phone call, whatever it is. I'm waiting. I'm introducing interruptions. By setting up self-service, you can actually usually get the compliance folks to go along with you because we're now, giving people out a named procedure rather than saying, hey, here's a SSH key and some pseudo privileges and a script and, say a prayer. It's, we're able to give kind of that named access to folks. I mentioned this in my talk earlier today, the dog pile, and their favorite one, right? That, by kind of this more ad hoc way people work today, it's like, oh, well, there's some incident going on. People jump on the bridge. They go, oh, I think it's a problem with, the DB07 server, right? So then you go and log into that server and you run top, and the first 10 things are your other colleagues running top, right? Or people start trying to change things and see what's going on. So it's difficult to kind of control versus more of the self-service idea, which is, hey, let's run this this command through a self-service framework, and we can now see all the access, and we can now see what's going on and step by step, and much smoother and easier way to work. Another great example of where seeing people have success kind of introducing self-service is the stopping the unintentional self-inflicted wounds, right? The I'm an expert, I don't read the wiki, right? That, at some point there is something that changed, right? The service restart flags had to change, or the NOC was upset because they're like, hey, every time you guys do a restart, we run around for 20 minutes trying to figure out what's going on before we realize it was, doing a restart. So please pause the monitoring before you do your restart. Maybe that was in a Slack somewhere, or somebody finally put it in a wiki, right? But the reality is we know what happens, right? Which, 3 o'clock in the morning, the expert rolls out of bed. They're like, I've done this, for 5 years. I'm just going to do my restart the same way I always do it. And, alarm bells go off and things blow up because they didn't read the wiki because they're the expert, right? Versus in the self-service idea, it's like, let's collaborate on those procedures. And now we're using the same procedure time and time again, right? So, when you roll out of bed at 3 in the morning, you're running the procedure, but it's already been kind of updated in the background. And one more here, this idea of the known issue doesn't get the permanent fix, right? This happens a lot where it's, there's a problem over and over again, and it gets escalated, and, we don't have the budget, or whatever the reason might be, and it doesn't get fixed, right? This actually happened to a Rundeck open source user. They talked about their favorite Rundeck job they ever had. They're an insurance company. And it was the first Rundeck job they ever used. And it was they had a underwriting process that was kind of, like, you had to have like 5 or 6, analysts that would do their bit of the process. And they had custom software to do it. It's a web-based thing. But if you didn't hit the unlock button or close policy or whatever it is button before you went and got a cup of coffee or shut down your computer or whatever it is, it actually put a database level lock on that policy record, and then you couldn't get back in and unlock it, right? So this would happen, I think 20 or 30 times a month this would happen. And it usually was found out when some high net worth person was on their way to the broker's office, and the broker couldn't, get to the policy, and they're screaming, we're going to lose business. And so it literally turned into like 20 or 30 P1 DBA bugs, like a 4-person DBA team. They constantly got this stop everything 24 hours a day, and you got to go and fix this problem. Well, they escalated that to the development team, say, hey, can you fix your software? And went all the way to the SVP level, and the development side won. They said, sorry, we're going to replace this system within 2 years, right? Which is never going to happen. But so you've got to work around these P1 bugs, or P1 tickets. So bug closed, right? We're not going to fix it. So the first thing they did is they said, well, let's create a self-service job that just essentially we'll give it to the agents, and we just basically, what it does is step 1, it runs a little status check to see if that record's actually locked. Step 2, it unlocks the record. Step 3, runs a little status to make sure it's there. Oh, I forgot. There's a step 0, which is opens a ticket, because you got to have a ticket. And then step 4 would close the ticket, so nobody ever saw the ticket. And they gave that to the customer service agent and said, here, if this ever happens, just put the name in the policy, put the policy number in there, run this job, problem solved. They got rid of 20 to 30, these P1 DBA bugs a month, right? So, this happens more times than we care to admit. So, self-service is a great way to kind of push that toil off of you, instead of having until somebody figures out politically of how to get that fixed. So, the self-service design pattern really, in a nutshell, kind of works like this, right? We have people that need to consume these ops capabilities. So, how do we make it so we can have these ops capabilities contributed by these specialists? A lot of different ways to do it, but I think the key attributes that really make folks successful. Number 1, it's pull-based, right? Number two, we have to work with the tools and languages that people want to use, right? So how many times have we fought this battle of it's all going to be CF Engine, it's all going to be Blade Logic, it's all going to be Puppet, it's all going to be Chef, it's all going to be Ansible, right? And what happens? We have all of that, right? Plus shell scripts and PowerShell scripts and everything else in between, right? So, I think it's high time we accept that, hey, we have to let teams, and folks work with the tools that they want to work. We can't expect to retool everybody every time we come along with something new. So being able to let them slot things in that they want to use into a consistent process is an important capability. Same as the ability to define those guardrails, right? For provide that work safety. So standard options, or being able to constrain option input, or have error handling or notifications, or conditionals. Being able to set it up so the folks who are defining these procedures, they're able to kind of safety proof or mistake proof the procedures that they're handing off. And importantly, let the people who push the buttons also define the buttons, right? So it's not just about let's define control for somebody else. It's let them, when they're developing their applications, give us what's the standard vocabulary. Everything should have a start, a stop, a restart. Kind of health checks, level 1, 2, 3. Should have kind of the known problems. They know it best. Let them define it. Hand it off to operations to vet it, and then turn around and give them access back. And so really, the reality is that this self-service is less about the automation and the workflow and what kind of moving the bits, and it's more about the user experience, right? Giving people, how they want to work, set up those guardrails I talked about, and making sure that we're keeping the environment details up to date for them, right? Unlike, saying, oh, well, here's your script, and you got to go and edit this file too of all the different servers that you want to make it work on. It's just not going to work. We're not going to be able to hand that off. And it's important to know that, self-service is more about, it's more than someone else writing the automation for you. So if you think about it, this is kind of getting a little off the beaten path here, but if you think about it, or in the weeds, I should say, an automated procedure kind of has three essential pieces to it, right? One is the definition of the automated procedure, right? The ability to define it, right? Two is the ability to execute it. And three is, who is the governance and the oversight for that procedure. And the reality is, in traditional kind of siloed operations, all of that, really lived in that operations team. We had one central bottleneck, silo kind of team who would take responsibility for all three of those things. You need something done, in comes the ticket, and they're going to use their automations for them to do it, right? And, more and more we're kind of seeing this, rigid self-service, right? Like the ability to, well, they'll define it, right? And they'll do the governance over it, but they'll give you a button, right? So like CI loops are a great example of this, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to give you the build and deploy loop here, or a deploy button, but all it does is deploy a WAR file of this type to this particular service, right? And that's kind of the rigid self-service. And because of that, it's really more limited self-service. I'm just giving people the ability to do these few kind of, I'm poking a hole to do these kind of few constrained things. And then, kind of this other idea has been coming along, which is really about how do we drive these more high velocity handoffs. And that's like, well, let's use these kind of CI loops so people can define the procedures themselves. But still, now I'm handing it off to, I've shifted left. They've defined my procedures, but I'm still handing it off to operations to do the execution, to do the governance, and go from there. And what, self-service operations is really about is about pushing both those things, the ability to define the automation and the ability to execute the automation to whoever needs to consume those operations, those automated operations procedures, but maintain the ability to govern and control, ultimate control within the trusted operations organization. Be that an SRE model, classic operations model. It doesn't really matter, but it's more that somebody in a central trusted team is maintaining that governance. And seeing more and more where organizations are now, once they get that down, they extend that governance to those teams to say, hey, I'm going to let you do certain things, but even within that, I'll let you make those localized decisions because each business unit has its own policies and its own ability to accept certain amounts of risk. So all this together, I just love the animation. That's why I did these slides. Self-service is really about both building and running the operations procedures. And, it's really kind of key because much like in the SRE, some of the SRE context about splitting the the running in production from the maintained by that operations team. In a true self-service operations model, we're able to take these three aspects, right? The definition, execution, the governance, and move it throughout the organization to where it makes the most sense to keep things flowing, to keep things moving, to have that fast feedback, moving the control closer to the people who have the context, right? That's a key aspect here. It's not just about somebody else will define a button that they'll give it to you. It can start there, but the organizations that really get the momentum have the ones that figured out how do we break these three things down and really distribute it throughout the organization. So the common kind of rollout pattern we see for this self-service pattern kind of goes generally like this. It generally starts with the automated procedures. We need a kind of a standard platform or standard mechanism for that. Again, it's not like, we're going to use Chef, right? It's more like we need a platform that can incorporate different types of modular automation, but let people define the workflows and the security and whatnot that goes with it. And then also there's a monitoring side to it, right? Monitoring and observability now. How do we get people the right views so they're not just flying blind, right? It's there's a window on the cockpit and they can see where they're going. So generally it's a combination of, hey, the automation, think about the automation framework and think about or frameworks and think about the monitoring side of things. And, it's also, security and operations working together to say, hey, how are we going to manage secrets? How are we going to manage identity, right? How are we going to make sure we're capturing all the audit logs? How are we going to define, access control policies? And what they get out of that is, the engineers are getting, or the consumers of the operations procedures are getting visibility and, some limited controlled, self-service. And operations can also use these same tools to do their support work and remediation work. So everybody's happier. Things are a little bit better, but things are still a bit rigid. Usually we see people kind of next doing is saying, well, let's get this stuff into an SDLC, right? Let's treat this like code, which is essential, is saying that these aren't static things that we maintain somewhere else. This actually comes with our releases, right? And we're treating these with a code review process, meaning that the people who are writing their applications, who are, building these, either it's a infrastructure they're delivering, or they're delivering application they're delivering. They're creating these procedures with it. They're doing code reviews. Operations is saying thumbs up to thumbs down to this will work, this won't work. Refining their procedures and then having a consistent way to promote those to a production environment, which is essential for doing this at scale, right? You can do with just the kind of the platform idea with some monitoring automation, you can get it working with smaller teams, but to really make it work in a larger, more complicated organization, having that software development lifecycle discipline is huge, right? And then step 3, it's like, okay, well now let's plug it into everything else, right? I mentioned before about tickets, right? Well, let's open tickets, close tickets. Let's make sure that before somebody does a procedure, they got to give us a ticket number. We'll check the ticket system to make sure that they're on that ticket, right? We prefer not to do that, but that's the rules. That's what the compliance folks said we have to do. So why fight it? Let's incorporate that in here. You see a lot of things going on the package repository side and, kind of ideas of, software supply chains, making sure the right assets are being used. How do we plug that in? So there's a lot of, enterprise systems, enhanced monitoring, things that we can pull into this as well to give kind of more power and capability to these platforms. And then step 4 is usually the happy accident, which is, hey, we're actually making security and compliance happy. Because before it's like, well, we got all this theater of control around our tickets, right? And it's like, oh, this ticket's got it's got approval and everything, it's great. But then it comes down to actually somebody doing something. And what does the ticket says? Someone just did something and they wrote done, right? And what actually happened, who did it, where it happened, we don't really know, right? So, but by having this platform approach, it gives us all the information we need without having to go through that kind of expensive, painful, audit evidence gathering collection, right? We automatically know, where this procedure came from, who reviewed it, right? Who ran it, where and when did it run, who created the policy that allowed that person to run it, who created the procedure, what's the approval trail, if there was the tickets and whatnot. So now we can answer all these questions without having to do a whole lot of manual work. It just happens automatically, which makes them makes compliance, because often you say, we're going to have this new idea. We're going to create all this self-service and let operations work be done by everybody in the organization, right? Isn't that great, right? They'll probably freak out at first, but when you explain it from this perspective, they go, oh, wait a minute. Now we're actually raising our compliance stance, and we're actually raising our visibility and distributing control at the same time. Right? That's a huge win. So, strategic. I've been talking a lot about sort of the bottom up, like find those anti-patterns and saying, let's steal back time from all these little things, right? Start to gather time and get that momentum going, so we can focus on those other higher value changes. But I've also seen it come the other way, the top down, where people are using self-service as a strategic foundation for strategic initiatives. Two great videos to watch, two good examples. I mentioned this Ticketmaster. So Jody Mulkey, their former CTO, talked about this. So they had a situation where their average MTTR, so mean time to repair for major web incidents, like people can't buy Adele tickets, right, was 47 minutes, right? Which in an industry where they're already kind of hated, right, because they stand in the way between people getting the the things they want. When you can't print playoff tickets for 47 minutes, like that's front page. It's a big deal. It's big. That's national news, right? So it's a huge issue. So what they realized was that so much of their time was spent in all of these escalations, right? So much of this time was spent from the level 1 knock people can't do anything. They had to escalate. They call them almost the escalators, right? They're constantly having to escalate everything they're doing. And so they decided this new program, they called support at the edge. And part of it was, say, how do we empower the teams closest to the problems to actually go and solve these problems? And what they started by doing is saying, well, let's shift left here. Let's have the development, organization build and test these procedures, for all these known issues, and procedures to diagnose problems, restart things, clear caches, reset configurations, test them out those in our early environments, and then actually empower the NOC team with those tools to make that happen. And then in times they do have to escalate, have you had this scenario before where, you're on call, you get this call, and it's it's somebody, the NOC, and they're like, oh yeah, there's a problem. I'm like, okay, what's the problem? Oh, XYZ is down. Oh, well, did you try this? And they're like, yeah. Well, it didn't work. Well, what did it say? I don't remember, right? And you're like, how am I supposed to help here, right? But this way, by using the same procedures, like, oh, well, they would log in and say, oh, I can see the output that you ran. I can see the jobs you ran. I can see what you tried to do. Now that means X, Y, and Z. Let's go and do this, right? So over the course of about 18 months of kind of putting this into place, they took their major web incidents from 47 minutes down to 3.8 minutes, right? Just from empowering those teams closest to the problem to take action. And even got to the point where they were putting links in the monitoring tools to the automated jobs to say, if you see this, try this first before you call anybody, right? So they reduced their MTTR by like 92%. The escalations were reduced by 50%, which made everybody happy, right? 50% less interruptions kind of coming up the stream. And they reduced the overall support costs by 55%, which made everybody happy. It's kind of cool. They put in also this sort of new hierarchy. They based it on the emergency medicine. So they had their EMTs and the ambulance folks, and they said, hey, you have X amount of minutes to solve this problem with these amount of tools, right? And then they had their next folks on call. They called them like the emergency room doctors, right? They had a certain amount of time, a certain set of tools to make decisions and try to fix things. And then they had the specialty surgeons, right? The brain surgeons, and they would be the third level escalation, usually developers to come in and fix things, and they would have kind of free reign. And what's cool about that program is not only did it give them these results, but it gave people in operations a career path, right? People that were in the NOC before, number one, they were operators, so they loved life again. It's like, I'm not just watching screens and making phone calls that nobody's answering and looking through binders, but I'm actually taking action. I'm back to being an operator, and now I've got a career path. It's like, hey, I'm doing the EMT role. I'm going to be emergency room doctor next, right? So it kind of gave them a progression through operations. So a lot of really cool things came out of that. And one more, but self-service being the standard, being the heart of that. Sean Norris, he was the SVP of Cloud, I believe, at the time at Standard Charter. I think they're based in London, but they're mostly in emerging markets. They have 86,000 employees in 60 different countries. So that's 60 different regulatory regimes they have to adhere to as a bank, right? It's a total nightmare. And the reality was you realize that, it's an old bank too, right? I think Queen Victoria signed their charter, right? I mean, the bank predates light bulbs, right? So they imagined everything was optimized for compliance. So if you wanted to do something in production, because they had all these different regulatory regimes, you couldn't have somebody in Indonesia logging into an environment that has people's banking records from Malaysia, right? I mean, it's like they're next door neighbors. You can't do anything about it because of all these different regulatory regimes. And they also had situations, it got to the point where if you wanted to do anything in a production environment, you had to go to this system, like ticket system, get a special token. Then you had to use that token to log into that environment. Then you had to feed that token into a screen recorder that would record everything you did in that environment. And then your manager had 48 hours to watch that video to attest that what you did was what you said you did, right? Because that's just where they threw up their hands. That was their default position because they couldn't control, all of this access. So, they had a lot of problems, a lot of one-offs, a lot of issues. So, Sean took this kind of self-service operations approach really for two reasons. One is he wanted to put consistency across the bank, right? To say, hey, here's the way. And he started with, he's an ops guy, because the first thing he started with was failover, right? Everybody has to have an automated failover process that does X, Y, and Z that works behind one button, right? With some options. And that was number one. And then he went to restarts, and then he went to deployment and a few other things after that. But putting consistency, but also it gave him a level of controlling those compliance issues. So now they wouldn't have to watch these videos and attest that people did. They could just say, we know exactly what ran, when, and where. That also allowed them with their cross-country problem, because now I can let people in other countries tend to production environments in other countries because they don't have direct access. They have access through their self-service platform. So it's pretty cool. In about a year's time, they saved 28 people years worth of time. 13,000 ops tasks. Didn't have to go through those crazy review processes. They had about 200 less customer impacting events because of all that consistency. And I think they said that the applications that they managed in this way, they haven't really rolled it out fully yet. And I think it was about half the bank or so was doing it this way. They had something like 20 or 30% faster response times for resolution because they had these standard processes that everybody was able to collaborate around. So another great example of self-service being the key mechanism that kind of allowed them to drive some really cool stuff. So that's kind of it. So my recap, SRE is a lot more than a title, and SRE is really a new way to think about operations work, right? And I think if you think about those three principles and kind of really what they mean to your organization and what that would actually mean to implement it, it's a great way to really kind of drive the conversation around what SRE actually is. All the other things of the observability and the automation and the cloud native tools and the programmer skills, right? All those things I think are secondary to these three principles that really are core. Air budgets and toil limits, again, it's a simple idea. They're simple ideas, but I think they're pretty profound and have a great impact on rethinking how operations should work. I'd say be practical. Start by focusing on the toil. That's why I spent so much time talking about self-service, other than the fact it's near and dear to my heart. I think it's a place where you can get a lot of wins no matter what the rest of the organization is thinking about these SRE ideas. And find and fix those toil anti-patterns. Find a way to empower the organization to find and fix these things. It's a lot more effective, and it becomes a self-perpetuating improvement cycle, because as you eliminate toil, you're actually gaining back time. So you can put some of that time into finding and fixing more toil, and some of that time you've now reclaimed for other things. So when it works at scale, it's a beautiful thing because it keeps fixing itself. And I'd say, that applying that self-service operations design pattern is a great way to get rid of their waiting, get rid of the interruptions that will get in the way of, being able to implement the rest of these things. So my Twitter DMs are open, or just email me if you want to talk, or however you want to get a hold of me. On the Rundeck side, we've been trying to go out and document a lot of these self-service design patterns. We're trying to make it more of an open source kind of book to go about it. So if you want to read that or collaborate on that, just go ahead and let me know. And that's my talk. I got time for questions, or we can hold questions for afterwards. You guys decide. All right.